Hello and welcome back to another edition of ESPN Scrum Reset. Sam Bruce and Christy Doran back in what is a spiderless Schmidt House. Christy, we were in the storage room last week at ESPN HQ here in Sydney, but great to be back in the Schmidt House here with you this week in what has become another huge week in rugby.
This is the year that keeps giving, isn't it? We probably thought it was 2023 when Eddie Jones arrived, and it seemed like there was a headline a minute there at that point in time. But huge news in rugby. You almost have to go back to last week to kind of catch up with it all, because Dave Rennie, new All Blacks coach, and very familiar to people in Australia. Stephen Larkham re-signing for another couple of years. And then the news today in the last 24 hours of Zac Lomax, NRL State of Origin star, signs with the Western Force.
He sure does, and that's where we've just come from, isn't it? Rugby Australia HQ, just across the way here at Moore Park. Zach, front of the media. Christy, let's go straight there. We're going to start, as we always do, with our headlines of the week, because I think that is yours for this week.
Well, isn't it a coincidence that Joseph Akusa-Swale goes down with a hamstring injury that you picked up very, very quickly on Friday evening at the Sydney Football Stadium, and then Swale goes down, and then, welcome Zac Lomax. That is the headline, I think, isn't it? Because isn't it extraordinary that when we talk about the power of the NRL, there were so many more journos and cameramen and camos that were at the Rugby Australia headquarters at Moore Park than you've seen for years and years.
Probably outside of a Wallabies World Cup squad announcement almost.
Yeah, it felt like there was probably 35 people in there. It was hard to get a question. And that was... It was great just to have a little bit of that energy return to rugby union.
We did have a little bit of trouble, as you say, getting a question in, because there was a Kiwi gentleman there, I think from TV1, who was insistent on asking, 4 or 5 questions from a New Zealand perspective. And I thought it might have been a touch overkill from that particular individual.
Premature to be talking about, preparing to take on the All Blacks. I think his biggest thing for Zac Lomax is going to be able to play some minutes, really. Like, he's barely played. It was interesting, actually, that he was asked, would you expect to take on the Chiefs, by that very reporter in 2 weeks' time? I don't think he's going to be playing that game. Do you see him on the bench just for a headline, maybe for an extra 1,000 people to come through the turnstiles? Possibly. But he has to get up to speed from a strength and conditioning perspective, because the last thing that you want is to bring in a hot new, maybe not the Ferrari, but a Maserati, and then next second you get that person to break down. So I think they will ease him back. They've got the Hurricanes, the Force, this week in New Zealand, followed by a bye, and then the Chiefs maybe the week after that. You see him. But it's big news, and it was put to me by someone yesterday. Is it desperate meets desperate?
Well, I think it was certainly a desperate situation for Zac Lomax. I mean, let's be honest here. He was left with few other opportunities, right, Christy? His attempted move to the Melbourne Storm, of course, fell through. The Eels only agreed to reduce that exclusion period from the NRL with another club by 1 season. I mean, Japan and France, these competitions are halfway through their seasons, aren't they? And I mean, almost have had the feel last week when Zac Lomax was spotted there at Rugby HQ that he was going back hat in hand as kind of a last resort, saying, guys, almost, you're all I've got. Now, I think a lot of people's question out there will be, did RA come back with an improved offer? We don't exactly know that for sure. We think it's somewhere in the vicinity of 300 to 400 grand for 2026 at least, maybe inclusive of that, 100K top up from Rugby Australia. But I think, Zac, more so than Rugby Australia, is the guy who was here left with no other option.
Yeah, he essentially was, because, he couldn't play for another NRL club. And you're right, like the clubs overseas, you can't just walk in there in the middle of March when the French top 14's got a couple of months to go, et cetera, et cetera. But it's the idea of the top ups. A lot of people might not necessarily know what it all means. Like, the salary caps are completely different for codes, and for rugby league at the moment, it's a tick under 12 mil.
Yep.
From a Super Rugby perspective, 5.5 million. But there are national top ups, which are good luck trying to get your hands on the list of who exactly is and how much they're paid, because it range from 25,000 to, in the case of someone like a Swale, closer to $1 million probably. So, so how much did RA really chip in there? How much money did the Western Force this year have to play with? My thoughts are he'll probably have an improved second year because
Okay.
he won't be missing that first half of the Super
Yep.
Rugby season. There's things that would have been said to his agent. He didn't directly name him, but Clinton Shavosky, the former NRL player, played a bit of State of Origin and of course the Queensland Reds before going up to Ulster. He also represents Angus Bell, who Zac Lomax heavily referenced today about
He did, didn't he? Yeah.
someone that he's spoken to a fair bit over the last few months, but also years and having a friendship. But yeah, Zach, I don't like you get national test match appearances as well. So if you play 5 tests, you're getting $50,000-$60,000 there. If you play all 10, you're getting an extra 100K. So he would have been incentivized. Look, back yourself here. You're going to have a good second year, but the first one, I don't think the Force would have picked up maybe the bulk of it,
Yep.
and maybe that's why we saw Neve O'Connor there today, because this is heavily driven by the Force. I thought it was a good report by Jamie Penroom in the last 24 hours around, the fact Simon Cron's taking him out for dinner. Kurtley Beale is someone that they've been able to lean across. The fact that Kurtley and his wife have had a great relocation, like so many of these Waratahs players, over to Perth. It's a pretty happy hunting ground for Tars guys to go over there. And I think you'll be out of the limelight somewhat from rugby league, particularly by going over to Perth until the Perth Bears arrive. And knock, knock, is that 2028? Who knows if Zach ends up going there or overseas. I can't imagine he'll stay beyond a home World Cup in 2027. But he was somewhat evasive around, are you're committed to fulfilling your contract? Because obviously this is the guy who's walked out on deals in the past.
Well, from the Dragons first and then the Eels.
Yeah, and that was only 12 months into it because he was clearly chasing the $360, which, we spoke about extensively last year. But it is a big signing because I think, the guy's 190 centimetres. He's a State of Origin player. He's actually achieved more in the game than people like Swali, Nwanga. He's brilliant in the air. He might be the best out of those guys in the air. He and Mark probably would kind of, it would be a close run thing between those two with how special they are. But he's a proper athlete who can kick, who can slot goals. I think it almost proved to be a no-brainer for rugby to pick him up. And I hope that they didn't break the bank because, and you asked a question around that, I'll let you ask that question in a second from what you poised to Phil Wall. But the reality is he came back to them, having turned them down originally. Surely you're not going up in your offer.
No, I don't think you are at all. And that's what I said to Phil. You've made a point of being, fiscally responsible in this reset of Australian rugby. And Phil, as Phil tends to do, kind of sidestep the crux of my question. But it seems that is the case in this scenario. At least we haven't been found out otherwise. There's been no leaks to suggest that this is actually, an $800,000 deal with a top up, a sizable top up, similar to what was used for Angus Crichton. And, we've given RA a fair bit of stick on this pod over a while. And I think you've got to give them credit for, holding firm on that line. And as you say, it feels like a smart bit of business because he ticks a couple of boxes where the Wallabies are a little bit light on. If they see, the fact that Carter Gordon is going back to number 10. Now, I've spoken about his goal kicking time and time again on this podcast, and I have zero confidence in that. So you've got to find someone else who can do it. And we're going to talk about Ryan Lonergan, I'm sure, shortly. We've got a number of questions on the halves situation in Australian rugby this week. But Zac Lomax, I did the numbers, bit of research today, 74%. So a little bit low last year, but in 2024 kicked at 80%. Now, you'd love to see that up towards 85 and 90%. Now, in rugby, you're probably kicking a lot more penalty goals than typically you do in rugby league. But some folks who watch a bit of Origin football might remember the sideline conversion he kicked 5 minutes after halftime in Game 3 of the Blues 2024 series, deciding win up there at Suncorp. And as you said, he was such a threat aerially off either Mitchell Moses, I think, in that game, and previously Nathan Cleary when Nathan Cleary's been fit at Origin level. So we know the Wallabies struggled under the high ball last year, Christy. We know it is such a big part of the fourth set piece, essentially, in Test rugby at the moment. So straight off the bat there, undoubtedly Zach has got some work to do and learning that, isolation can be your friend in rugby league. It is your absolute enemy in rugby union. He's got a lot to get up to speed with, but with those raw attributes and the string to his bow of goal kicking, it feels like at that price, if it is around 300 to 400 grand, feels like a smart bit of business.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think even with the goal kicking, I'd love to see the stats here. But to me, like watching a little bit, particularly Origin, so many tries are scored out wide,
From
aren't they?
kicks, yeah, absolutely.
And in the air or through the hands. But either way, they're so brilliant at putting the ball down just inside the field of play. But it means it's a harder goal kick, doesn't it? Because you're so often kicking in those the 5 meters either side of the touchline. So yeah, I think it's a great piece of business. I think from a marketing perspective, it's a good thing. The Western Force, do they need another outside back? You could debate that. Like you're losing Darcy Swain, Franco Molina, who's going back to up to Newcastle. Like to me, it's the top 5 that's often an issue for them. But if you look on the weekend, maybe they just couldn't find the touchline when they lost to the Highlanders, and that could have been their friend on the weekend. And if you have a giant boot from Zac Lomax, maybe that does help you. So I think it's a good thing. And clearly the Wallabies struggled under the high ball last year increasingly. They were exposed against several international oppositions. So, yeah, I think it's a good thing. The knock-on effect will be interesting. Corey Toole's probably not going to get a national top-up now. Can the Brumbies afford to keep him? It's gonna stretch everyone. Like when Angus Crichton comes over from the Roosters, someone like a Josh Flood can't afford to stay here because he's not getting a national top-up. The Reds can't really break the bank there. Hunter Paisami's off as well. So, the priorities mean that maybe one person, a big name comes in, and then maybe 1 or 2 smaller names go out.
Indeed. What else did you kind of take away from his press conference, Christie? I thought it was interesting. A nice comment about, obviously the Wallabies is the ultimate goal here, but I'm very much at the foot of the mountain. I think Zac concedes that he's got a lot of work to do. Hasn't played the game since he was 15. He said today was played both up until that point. I believe the Temora Tuskers, the Rugby Junior Rugby Club, and in made a PWSA New South Wales side that featured Nick Frost. And another NRL player in Oregon, Kafusi. There was 1 or 2 other names in there. So, look, it's not like he's coming into this game without any grounding in rugby union, but it's going to be, he's 26 now, so that's 11 years that he hasn't played. And I think, we spoke about Angus Crichton a month or so ago. He went through to sort of playing in the game until he was 18, Australian schoolboy. So, just a little bit deeper into it. I think Zac's going to have a harder time transitioning potentially than Angus will. But he's got enough time to get into that World Cup squad. And, as Peter Horne said at the finish of today's presser, the more depth we've got in positions right across the board, the better.
Yeah, I think he referenced there was 48 players
used last year
for the Wallabies, and it could have easily been a couple of more. Nowhere near as many debutants in year 2 as there was year 1 with Joe Schmidt. But I think Suoli Vunivalu is someone that Code Hoppers we've almost forgotten about because it just wasn't memorable at all, was it? It was forgettable, like his experience. But he had a couple of good moments, but he was plagued by hamstring injuries. And you think about Suali, he's been plagued by injuries recently too.
That's a good point.
And the other issue that he's got at the moment is, I just don't think he's a 13. And we'll maybe continue to talk about that going forward. But I spoke to Lottie Dakiri yesterday and I asked him, because it feels like 2003 all over again, doesn't it? When you got Saylor, Rogers, Takiri, he was the last one to come over. And now we've got Swaley into Angus Crichton, into Zac Lomax. What was the one try that the Wallabies scored in the 2003 World Cup final?
High ball,
crossfield kick from Narcombe to Takiri, who leaps over. It was Jason Robinson, wasn't it? So what's old is maybe new again in terms of those, the fashionable kind of stuff and how the games are played, but particularly come World Cups, semi-finals, knockout footy. What does South Africa do so well? They compete. So I think that's a good thing. But Takiri, I think I almost led him to this point, but we've got to let these guys fly. Suali's best game by country mile was still his first game for the Wallabies against England, and he was so damaging and lethal in the air. Right now, he just looks like a shell of himself. He's lacking confidence. I don't think 13 is the spot, and I think most people were in agreement that it's probably out wide. Lomax, I know that there was a thought from Cronny a couple of months ago that maybe he could be a 13 option. That's been shelved for now because they're going to be putting him probably on the wing, I imagine, to let him grow. That's the big thing. Get him to find his feet, get some confidence, let him soar into the air because you only have to see the footage of Israel Folau against Suntory for about a month ago where he scored a hat-trick for the D-Rocks and he's climbing over people. And the Wallabies haven't, they had Mark Nwangari to an extent doing it, but they need someone who's going to be that absolute aerial threat out wide who can get those crossfield kicks from whoever it might be. And that's what excites me. So I think, let him grow out wide and use his threats.
Yeah, hard to disagree. As you said, probably not going to see him, potentially not against the Chiefs in what would be 3 weeks' time. Not sure who they've got the week after that game. The Force, of course, they've got the Hurricanes this week. Then they have the bye. Then it's that Chiefs game. And then, so it could be a month before we see Zac Lomax in a Western Force jersey, potentially. But look, have you been surprised by some of the rugby league reaction, Christy? And I made the unfortunate mistake of switching on NRL 360 for what I thought might be some measured and insightful comments around Zac's code switch. But you
didn't get it?
No, not exactly. When you've got Braith saying that no Wallaby would walk into the Kangaroos, as he expects Lomax to do with the Wallabies in a few months' time. And yet we saw Mark Nwangari go straight into that Australia team roughly 4 or 5 months ago for that Ashes tour. So I don't know if Braith had a bit of a
that's a good point
brain fart there or anyway.
If maybe putting a bow on the Zac Lomax conversation, where is he though in terms of the pecking order just at the moment?
I think he's right on the edge of probably 6 outside backs you would have in with considering that Suoli'i can also play in that part, and who knows, we may. He's pretty confident that Les Kiss sees him more of an outside back than as a midfielder. I'm pretty sure you've said previously. So, look, you've got Wright, you've got Jorgensen clearly, Mark Nwangari, who will be overseas but will be eligible, Corey Toole, Dylan Peach, and then probably Potter. Kellaway could retire. Didn't have a great game on the weekend for the Tars, but he's a classy player when at his best. So there's 7 or 8 there down Gunu. So I think he's probably outside at the moment. But as we've said previously, that rugby championship next year is going to be brutal. 6 games, a full rugby championship before the World Cup. I think you can expect to lose, if you get through that campaign losing, 4, max 5 players from your top Wallaby squad, I think you've done pretty well. It could be as bad as, 7, 8, 9, 10.
It's something that not many people have considered just yet because you almost forget that the truncated nature of what the TRC is generally in a World Cup year. 6 outside of World Cup years, it's been 3 previously, and it's going to be 6 next year, as you rightly point out. Like that's fascinating.
Yep.
And it'll be brutal. How many we see? I agree. I think he's probably on the edge. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a Wallabies camp in X amount of months and he turns up, but I absolutely don't expect him to be playing anytime soon. But it does make it interesting around who will be the 1,000th Wallaby. There's a new name, maybe
put him on the list.
Consider, isn't it? Like, and it's a fascinating conversation, talking point anyway. Well, that's my headline, which we talked about for a little while. What about yours?
Mine was the incredible finish in the Reds-Brumbies, Christy, and the grassy knoll footage that appeared on social media, if you like, courtesy of a friend of the show, Michael Atkinson. Now,
I don't think it was his, but he must have been sent.
Got it from somewhere else, but I'm giving him credit. That's the first place I saw it. Doing a great job on Weekend Today, isn't he, Atco? Looking $1 million.
He's made for it.
Isn't he just? But I, first of all, I had my doubts around, that vision, and I chased it up with Super Rugby officials on Monday morning and said, yep, that is authentic. The camera angles, can be deceptive, and that was the case on this occasion. And Stan Sport didn't show that angle. Regardless, the TMO couldn't have checked that or couldn't have intervened then because obviously the play finished. It wasn't in the lead up to a try being scored. That break by Trayvon Pritchard, or Jock Campbell, then Trayvon Pritchard finished with that Brumbies knock on. So that was the end of that play there, and there was still time on the clock. But it just shows you, angles and what we see at home, what the TMO sees. It doesn't always line up, does it, Christy? And I'm sure there were Brumbies fans that were crying blue still until they saw that on Sunday afternoon and probably just had to say, look, well, yep, there it is. Suggestions, I guess, make your own mind up whether there clearly wasn't any contact with Fraser McWright, but whether that ball went forward to start with, potentially, make your own mind up. But I think in the end, probably on the balance of what we've seen, the right decision was made.
I was told as well that the reason why they didn't have the footage with the stand camos is because one of them got fried with the lightning.
We haven't even got to that. What an incredible start to the night.
Obviously delayed until, was it 9 o'clock? That was
Yeah.
delayed till like on a Saturday night. A few people probably started to kind of unwind and switch off, but it was a remarkable finish, and it's a really crucial game. We spoke about it last week. I think one of the most crucial finishes that we've seen in a long time. Like the jeopardy now, the fact is the Brumbies could have been 4-0, could have been going to Fiji, absolutely flying and set up their season. Now they're 3-1, and you're thinking, oh dear, like they've just left it out there, and they capitulated in that last couple of minutes. They switched off. They, even if you don't acknowledge that you switched off, it's the mental thing. They thought that they'd won. Ryan Lonergan comes off, Tane Edmonds on, and unfortunately, like Tane's beaten there, all ends up by Carter Gordon, who's seen him, who's probably beaten him once or twice at Wallabies training last year, and he's gone, no, thank you very much, I'll be taking you. And he burnt him, didn't he? And that was a big moment. It's a big moment for the Queensland Reds because they're now 2-1. They've had a bye. They're going to get some more players back in due time. Tate McDermott was there, wasn't he? But he wasn't playing, clearly still in the tracksuit as he recovers from that hamstring injury. So it's a huge game with the ramifications. And now with the Reds hosting the Tars, who are feeling a little bit blue in the face
Big time.
with Joseph Swaley's injury, like it's an opportunity for them to kick on. It should do wonders, hopefully, for their next home attendance. Like they're bullish and hoping that 20,000 come through the gates there at Suncorp. Fingers crossed they do. And if it does, then it'll add to a spectacle, but a massive game. And good to be talking about Super Rugby as well.
For sure. Let's dig into that game a little bit more. I tell you what, it was the last thing I needed, a delay in that kickoff, because I'd been out for lunch on Saturday and might have been a little bit worse for wear. So I was kind of hoping to be in bed by about 9:30, and in the end I had to hang tough. But
that's tough, mate.
Glad that everyone came through that one. We got a game in because, sometimes you just say, right, we might have to cut our losses and go home here. But interesting that was, that could have been the culprit for that missing camera angle. A lot of talk around Ryan Lonergan. I know a lot of people in the game have been impressed by his performances so far this year. And Matty Ward's come in with a question this week around, I guess we've kind of been talking a little bit around the 10s and whatever, but who is your halves combination at this point in time? Is Ryan Lonergan doing enough for you to be pushing, potentially not just in that kind of group of three number 9s, but really rallying for a start ahead of a Jake Gordon, who's probably had, by his standards, a quiet start to the year?
Well, I've been saying for a little while, I'm a big Ryan Lonergan fan, and I think people that listen to the pod will know that. I think his service is good. If you want to have a look at what a halfback can do, have a look at Ben White for Scotland on the weekend against France, who absolutely outplayed Antoine Dupont.
And let him know about it.
And yeah, he did. He was just absolutely sensational. And we saw Lonergan on the weekend take control. A couple of big kicks towards the end in terms of the decision-making, the execution was first class. I think his pass is outstanding. He doesn't play around with it too much at the base of the ruck. Once or twice he needs to get his control a little bit better, picking it up in one clean movement. But his leadership, he's a winner. I love what he does. He's a goal-kicking option. He kicks off both feet. He's a smart guy. Defensively, he can occasionally get run over the top. I know that's an issue, and I think there's been a couple of super coaches that have pointed and highlighted that out. But he often does shoot out as well, which is why there could be more missed tackles. But he, to me, is by far and away the first choice number 9 at the moment, with Tate McDermott obviously injured at the moment. And I still think Tate's better off the bench too. From a 10 perspective, like, it's still pretty open, but I think that was a huge step forward for Carter Gordon. I like what he does. I think the fact that if you're not having to goal kick, it makes it even an easier decision to have him there. I do think that Ben Donaldson has some strengths about him. I loved what he did late in the first half, the force. He's a running threat, which I think is quality. And He's got a reasonable pass on him, defensively, high ball, but there's stuff that I think that all tens tend to have. Like, they all struggle in those areas a little bit. What's the core roles of the tens? Direction, passing, and steering that team around and being a running threat. I think he ticks a few of those boxes. But I just wonder, Decky Meredith, like, what's the 9, 10, 12, 13? Because I think you've got to start looking at it at the actual axis there. And what's that looking like? I'm not saying Pritchard's going to be a Wallaby this year, but geez, he's a player and a talent, isn't he? But I don't think Fela UI is going to be a 12 going forward. But where's Ikitau fitting into the system? I like what Meredith does in terms of he takes the ball to the line quite well. He's quick enough. He could be a little smoky to be in that wider squad given his versatility value. But I think it does seem obvious at the moment that it's a Lonergan, Carter Gordon 9-10 at the moment. Where do you...
Oh, what I loved about Lonergan the other night is he had a run too. Something you don't always see from Ryan Lonergan. And I was calling for it in the first half of that Crusaders game because I could see how they were stretching the Crusaders and some of those big forwards in closer to the rucks were just starting to get their spacing wrong. And that's exactly where Andy Muirhead went through for the first try for the Brumbies in that game. And I would have loved to have seen him have a crack that day. As it turned out, didn't need to, but great to see him have a run and make a break the other night. I'm not as convinced by his goal kicking as potentially some are. There was one bad miss the other night. I think he missed a couple, and one in particular you would expect him to kick sort of 9 times out of 10. That's a problem for all goal kickers, but it feels like the natural kind of foil there that if it is Carter Gordon, that could be something that you could offset. We've spoken about, asked the question, why hasn't Joseph Suoli'i had a nudge yet for the Wallabies at any level? So, look, and
all the Waratahs.
All the Waratahs for that matter. I don't hate your comments around Meredith. I've said it in previous weeks, so I probably don't need to go back there. I think he's in and around. And Donaldson, great to see him having a run as well the other day. And you just wonder whether being over there and the force count against him kind of fell off the radar a bit last year, the back end of the year, didn't he, under Joe Schmidt? And I guess that's the other thing we've got to think about, Christy, is we're going to have a coach for 3 games. And then while we think it'll be, continuity at large from then on under Les Kiss, that he's still going to want to change things and put his own spin on things. We know Tate McDermott was clearly his captain first couple of years up there alongside Liam Wright. Started a hell of a lot of games. So could Tate suddenly become a starter? I agree. I think he's better used off the bench. But is Les going to set the Wallabies up in a fashion that can better use Tate at test level than potentially that Joe Schmidt and before that, Eddie Jones and Dave Redding did?
Yeah. There's a couple of things to consider. One being, we know that increasingly teams and players that come off that can win games is so crucial. That last 20 minutes is often the defining minutes these days. And
Tate almost did that on the wing last year.
He has been phenomenal in that finishing role for a long time for the Wallabies. So I think you can almost lock that to be that's his role when he comes back in. Like Joe Schmidt didn't trust Lonergan to do that last year. Barely got used off the bench. We haven't seen Jake Gordon do that much. I actually think he could have a role to play in that capacity, in that area. Teddy Wilson's another one who just hasn't been used, has he, so far, that very much, not from a Wallabies perspective anyway, with Kalani Thomas being preferred. The other 10 that we haven't mentioned there, and it's a bit out of mind, but Noah Lolesio. The fact that Lonergan and Lolesio have played together so much, they're definitely a consideration. And so if we're thinking just super, maybe there are options. But I think if you're thinking about a test series in July, I'm still having Lolesio, I think, in the squad.
It's a great shout. Yep.
I don't know if they'll turn back to James O'Connor, but he will be another person. Like, he can clearly steer the team around, but he's another one with obviously Leicester having that break with the English Premiership stopping during the Six Nations kind of period. He's another out of sight, out of mind. And if there's an injury or two, well, he's still going to be knocking on the door, James O'Connor. I don't think he's going to be hanging up the boots just yet either. So, yeah. There's plenty of options. You just want someone to start commanding that role.
You do. And I think my one remaining concern with Carter is he seems to be fitting very well into that sweeping kind of Reds movement that creates and manipulates space out in those wider channels. But I don't know if that's going to be as successful at test level. And I'd just love to see him square up those shoulders on occasion. And maybe we'll get that this week against the Waratahs, see him take the line on, which is one to watch at Suncorp.
Last point on Lonergan, his goal kicking when he came in to Super Rugby was just elite. And I think that's where people remember it. they know that he has the capacity to be able to be that 90% goal kicker. I agree. Like the last 18 months, his goal kicking hasn't been as accurate. It'll clearly be a point of concern maybe, and somewhere he's going to be working at heavily. We've got to remember, like the last couple of years, Lawless was doing so much of the goal kicking for the Brumbies. If it wasn't him, Debrasini was doing it too. So I think almost Lonergan, it became like a, in the same way that Carter Gordon, like golfers got to be hitting balls, don't they? And in the same way that rugby players got to be kicking balls too. So maybe he'll get better and better. And that's the hope. And if he does, then that becomes an easier decision from a 9 perspective.
Louis Wershon's been pretty good for the Reds too, and another goal kicker as well. Slotted that one from the sideline after the siren, but he is heading off to Benetton permanently, isn't he?
Yeah, but a fighter, isn't he? He's a good player.
Yeah, I like it.
People have liked him for a long time. Clearly, there's a couple of good 9 options at the Reds that have made it tough for him to get first crack recently. But isn't it interesting? Like a few Wallabies came back last year who didn't necessarily be given the keys immediately. So that's Thomas, it's Tane Edmund, and I think the list kind of, Frosty hasn't
Kellaway
yet. Kellaway. So yeah, good points.
Just before we leave the Brumbies and Reds, a couple of injury updates. Someone's requested on Twitter, Tate McDermott and Tom Wright, I think both targeting sort of late in the regular season.
I reckon Tommy Wright could be earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Wright will be earlier. I wouldn't be surprised by middle of April, so in maybe a month's time or so.
And Tate still working his way back. I think he was speaking with Stan Sport the other week. He's maybe more around 10, 12 potentially, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And this is the interesting one with Swaley. 6 to 8 weeks. I heard it was a grade 3. That could be 10 weeks plus. So hold your breath there, Tars fans, but also Aussie rugby fans who want to see him out there and having some form before an international season. But yeah, hopefully it's not as bad as that. But yeah, 6 to 8 weeks could be even on the light side, maybe. Yeah,
I'll just give a little context about this because this happened literally about 2 minutes after I walked into the media box on Friday night at Allianz, and I was pulling my laptop out of the bag, laptop that is, and looked up, and there was Suoli just doing a standard run through, as you do from, the goal line to the 22. Anyone who's ever played any game of rugby has probably done that in a warm-up, and just saw him go down straight away, hobble, and then collapse immediately onto his back. And you just knew that it was serious. And that has put the Waratahs in a huge hole in the midfield, because when their squad came out, that was one area where you thought, geez, if there's an injury there, we can see why, Dan McKellar is having to play him there. But they had Joey Walton, Suoli, and George Pullman, who was the late substitution into that 13 jersey on the weekend, and had a pretty forgettable night, unfortunately for him. But that has left the Waratahs with a huge problem there. I mean, probably feels like Tristan Riley or Andrew Kellaway are the other options outside of Pullman. They have got a bit more depth in the outside backs, but you just wonder where their kind of backline threat is going to come from. Even considering rather that Joey hadn't really been a threat, so far this season. And it's the knock-on effects, because he is the marquee man, and people are coming to see him along with Max Jorgensen. And you just hope that this isn't the beginning of the end for the Waratahs season. But I feel like there will be a lot of people thinking that is exactly what it is.
Yeah, well, we've pivoted to the Tars, haven't we? So I'm sorry, Trayvon Pritchard, who I wanted to talk about, but no, that's fine.
I'll give you a shot. Hang on.
You're right. Like, it is a concern. Without a Henry O'Donnell, who they kind of thought could be another 13 option for them, he's having an extended period out of the game. I think he'll come back later in the season. Well, not this Super Rugby season, but maybe a Super Rugby Oz season later, or at the very least the next preseason. But yeah, they got exposed defensively, and that's an area where Suali is an intimidating force. And I think he's one of those guys, like you take out and I'm not going to say he has the same impact as an Andrew Johns, but you take out those good sorts of big name players, and what's the mental impact? And it felt like it was almost such a big mental kind of thing for the Tars to lose. You look inside or outside, and you've got Suali, and you're thinking, geez, like we're in an okay shape here, particularly when someone like a Jorgensen's further out wide himself. So yeah, it's huge. Like, who do they turn to? Do they back Pullman to have another crack? Like, I'd like to see him have another opportunity. It can't be easy. Like, Dan McKellar didn't want to lay blame at his feet. He clearly got sin bins in the second half for a really clumsy aerial challenge, which has just gone wrong for him. Geordie Barrett and Proctor in the midfield, like it doesn't get harder than having those two running at your
All Blacks quality midfield combination.
Unbelievable, right? And with what Barrett was doing, like the ball that he gave to Proctor to run through the chip, like that was a nightmare for someone like a Pullman. Great opportunity, but a nightmare as well in terms of having your first real crack there in that midfield channel. So, that's somewhere that they thought Pullman could play. That's one of the reasons why they signed him, was the versatile utility value that he offers. But yeah, like it wasn't a good one. Another like left field one, maybe shifting Lawson Crichton to 12 and a Joey Walton to 13 if you want. Gives them another ball playing dimension. Does it give Jack Bowen another opportunity at 10 with Deborah Rossini still being able to come on? With the last 30, I thought he came on too late the other night. But yeah, there's a few options to play with. But all year we've thought, far out, if Swaley goes down, they're going to have some real struggles in that area of the midfield. And that's where they got carved up. And by the end of that game against the Hurricanes, it was just, I thought McKellar would decide, we need to wrap this up, because it got away from him. 2 tries in the last 3 minutes for the Hurricanes, and they turned it on with 9 tries in total, didn't they?
It got ugly. I mean, they made a game of it in the first half, but it just felt whenever the Hurricanes got the ball, it was easy. They made easy meters. They found space. They had created line breaks. Finney Afafo was having a field day. Proctor, as you mentioned, and then, good luck tackling Asafa Almua out on the wing. I don't think there was a Waratah near him anyway, so it wasn't an issue. So you kind of felt that once, the Hurricanes got into their groove, that they could really kick away, and that's exactly what happened. I guess one positive for the Waratahs was Sid Harvey. You see a little bit of it, and you think, I like the look of this.
He's a quality young player. Could he play fullback this week?
Another option there, yeah.
I wouldn't rush him in just yet. I think that he could absolutely handle it, because he's played on the World Series 7 circuit and he's scored tries, match-winning tries. I saw him score one in Hong Kong. He's a mature kid, and he's young, he's little, but he'll get better. He's a gun goal kicker. He's going to be a player that you're going to really enjoy watching, and he looks like a smart rugby player.
There were 3 or 4 touches there where you just went, yeah, this kid has got something.
There was one moment, I wish he had been able to hit Jorgensen on the chest. He just threw it fractionally line, and Jorge couldn't handle it, but that would have turned into a line break. But it is not a easy thing when you're coming on to make your debut, when you're under the pump, firstly, but secondly, you look at that Hurricane side and it is just laden with test quality. So the fact that we're talking about him in such a positive light, even though the Tars got pumped by 40, is a good thing, and I think he'll be in the 23 this week.
Do you give them any chance going up to Suncorp?
I think there's got to be a response, doesn't there? There has to be, but the issue is the Reds should be full of confidence now, because they've just had that win. Had they lost there and not been able to snatch the late match winner against the Brumbies, they would have been under a lot more pressure. They would have been 1 and 2. Les Kiss wouldn't have been feeling so good about himself. Like Sean Maloney put the mocker on the Brumbies big time. He said
they were home, yeah.
They were home. Larkham was like, 4 straight or 5 straight against the Reds, and Les Kiss hasn't recorded a win against the Brumbies. Well, in 5 minutes, that blew up. Sorry, Shawnee, not your best moment there, but it's just changed it from a mental perspective, and that's why I think it'll be hard for a Tars perspective. But I think there will be a response. Matt Phillip is full of passion. The fact is that he comes into that post-match press conference and he's talking about the fact is that we've worked hard over the last 6 months to try to change the reputation of what the Waratahs have been. And this is not the DNA of us now going forward. So they would have got a real rocket, I think.
And yet so many, not only their fans, but the broader Super Rugby, family will be thinking this is the same old Waratahs. So this is a moment, and you feel like Dan McKellar could be ramming that home right now, is that no one expects us to get up now, do they? Our star players, he won't be saying our star player's gone and is out for 10 weeks or whatever, but no one expects us to bounce back from a 40-point flogging where we looked like a club scene, ironically, in club teen rather. What are you guys made of? You did the work in the off season. This is the first hurdle of the regular season, and boy, it was a big one. What is going to be your response? Let's go out there and see it.
Yeah, bang on. I think that's exactly what it'll be doing. And so that's why I think it makes for a compelling game this weekend.
Yep.
It should always be. The reality is the Tars beat the Reds comfortably in round one. The Reds were just miles off the pace. They didn't look like they were physically there, which is a concern given the fact that there's so many Wallabies and the next Wallabies coach. But the Reds have now managed to claw their way back. They are in the picture. If they win here, then all of a sudden they're 3-1, and they're right back in that top 4-6 kind of mix.
I'll give you a chance on Trayvon Pritchard now quickly here before we talk about Dave Rennie. I spoke to him in the preseason and I kept it up my sleeve until the week he made his debut. So that article, that interview is available on ESPN.com.au if you haven't seen it. Seems like a great kid. Again, 18, and it was a pretty impressive debut. Played, 65 minutes almost in the end, I think.
Yeah, Lachlan could be out for a while.
He was off early, wasn't he? And in a bit of trouble now. And again, looked right at home, made his tackles, chased hard to regather that ball from the Jock Campbell break that got them in the position to steal it at the death. And as I said, just speaking to him, you got the sense that he had a really good head on his shoulders, not going to get ahead of himself. Has clearly got the skills and traits to be a very good rugby player down the track. But just let's not get carried away early doors. That was a pretty handy start the other night.
I'm prepared to get a little bit.
I'm going to get carried away.
Well, I think between the two of them, he and Caden 21, they're both off contract at the end of 2027. Trayvon can play 10, 12 wing fullback. You ask some that know him reasonably well, they think that fullback is maybe his position, perhaps to start with wing, but he can play 10. And he did that at schoolboy level. And then for the Australian under-18s played 12, and he absolutely carved up the New Zealand schools. But he looks small at the moment because he's standing next to his brother Caden, who's 193 centimeters and is a physical presence. But the bloke's 18, he's going to get bigger. Yep. He's strong. He gets through contact really, really well. I'm really excited about them. Like, isn't it great about the ABs when you've got the Sevilla brothers that you used to talk about? And the Wallabies have had the Flying Bros, the Lonigans. Unfortunately, Lockie's barely laced up a boot for a long time now. But the Kefu boys were something else, weren't they, for a while? And you go back there, and it'd be awesome to have a pair of bros just ripping in. And you're right, he looks like he was so comfortable out there. I think he'll be playing more and more. He's an 18-year-old who's special. I think Caden is pretty talented. Tom Wright spoke about him really highly in the Super Rugby launch over in Auckland 5-6 weeks ago, and it's no surprise that these guys look so comfortable at the super level. They're going to be very talented special players to come.
So there's some really good things, interesting things, I think, around the pathways at the Reds and how he switched basically to focus on rugby at 15. And since then, for the last 3 years, didn't want to leave, felt at home. His mates were there and made comments to me around, I feel like rugby might finally be getting the pathways in order. Those underage championships, the generation, next gen previously, which he played a couple of games in, that finally, we've been screaming about this for years in Australian rugby. Every, follower of the game has understood that this is why so many of the fights are lost with rugby league at that earlier age. But speaking to him and the way he spoke about it around that pathway, his experience and that of his teammates there at the Reds kind of left me feeling, things might finally be in place.
That's a good shout. And I agree with that. The fact that it looks more professional is a big, big thing. And the Reds have done a good job there. I think Brumbies have done a good job in that space. And there's more players. We mentioned last week about some of the guys coming through, didn't we?
Yep.
But no one can rest on their laurels. And the reason why I say that is because like someone like a Caden and a Trayvon, they're not going to be on big deals at the moment, and they're going to be looked at so closely. Like the Cowboys previously looked at Caden himself. My understanding is that clubs are already looking at Trayvon. Why? Because they view him as a guy who could play 5'8" as well because of his ball playing capacity.
And we've got 2 new clubs coming into the NRL.
Exactly. And the broadcast deal is going to go up. There's some out there that think they could go up to 15 mil in their salary cap when it's already at 12. That doubles what Super Rugby sides can offer. So if you're prepared to throw some money at them and it's double the offer, it's going to be a challenging prospect to turn it down. So that's where I think RA, they've got the role to play from a national top-ups perspective, but it makes it difficult to be able to keep everyone. But these guys are really good young kids to watch, and I'm sure you'll be able to see Trayvon play again this week. He'll be worth keeping an eye on going forward.
Absolutely. Dave Rennie, as we mentioned off the top, new All Blacks coach. Look, I think it was a 2-horse race to begin with, and we quickly kind of figured out that it was actually going to be Dave Rennie's role. Some chat around Jamie Joseph not really, loving the, I guess, the hiring committee coming down and checking out the Highlanders. I guess, what had he got left to show, given, he was based in New Zealand and has been able to, be seen what he was doing there for quite some time. But Dave Rennie was very open up at Kobe, came in, went about his business. And I think probably there was no leaks with this one in the end, really, was there? They dropped this and...
Well, they did it, and then they announced it quickly, recognising things don't stay quiet for long.
So, look, I'm very happy for Dave. I've said it on this pod a number of times. I don't think he deserved to get the arse in the way he did, certainly, and not at all. I would have gone through with him to that World Cup. But here he is now in the All Blacks. Probably a job he's always wanted, probably wondered whether he would get back there. I think it's going to be a different All Blacks, setup. He's got some decisions to make around the assistant coaches, and that is happening as we speak. Some news on that not too far away. New players to be considered, the chance of Brady Retallick potentially coming back, Christie. He flagged that. I don't think New Zealand Rugby will move on that policy, but, who knows? I think a lot of Australians will be happy for Dave, will wish him well in that role. There's a question, though, on social media from my call out yesterday, well, what was the back end, Christie, of Dave Rennie's Wallabies tenure? And apparently, allegedly, you at the time said there were murmurs of unrest in that Wallabies camp. We know a lot of Wallabies love Dave Rennie. Now, every coach is not going to be adored by every player. And a Wallaby said to me once, you love the coach who's picking you. And that pretty much sums it up, really, doesn't it? But a lot of Wallabies were sad to see him go. We saw a lot of well wishes, Nick White, Quade Cooper. We know what happened there with Dave and him bringing him in from the cold. A couple of others, Samu Karevi, I think another one. So, look, a lot of Australians are going to be happy for it. But if we flash back a couple of years, what were you hearing, I guess, towards the back end there of that 2022 season?
I think you got to remember, hindsight is extraordinary, isn't it? But you think about 3-4 years ago, at the end of 2022, the Wallabies were winning at 38%. It was a dreadful run. The injury toll was significant. Yep. The amount of Achilles injuries there, and so you're right. You bang on about you like the Wallaby coach who's picking you, and that's the case. I think with all the Wallabies, you're barely ever going to get someone that will ever question anything if they're currently getting picked. So, but we've got to remember that end of the year spring tour. They did lose to Italy. They did, they had some close near-run things, but they were having near-run things for a while. And the selection did seem to be kind of a bit all over the shop, particularly from the 9s and 10 perspective. It seemed fairly reactive. Often it was going to the young guys and then increasingly going to the older guys. It was, I know Ololosio was in and then he was out of the 23 altogether.
Yep.
They looked at the 9s on each of the 3 tests to begin with for that spring tour as a different 9. And, Tate McDermott starts against Scotland, then he's out of the team against France, and then they lose to Italy. And I think there were some rumblings. I don't think it was necessarily a divide between the Pacifica players and the Anglo-Saxon players, but I think there was a little bit of unrest around certain things that weren't coming out in the public. But I think fundamentally people liked Dave.
Yep.
I just, even the coaching kind of situation, you saw Matt Taylor leave, Laurie Fisher come in. Dan Bacella is going to speak highly of him, and he's currently the Waratahs coach because he got brought on the ticket and then he ends up leaving ahead of the World Cup himself because he wasn't thrilled with how things went down. So you've always got to take a little bit of a grain of salt around who's picking you, who's there, who's actually speaking. And of someone like Quade Cooper, of course, he's going to speak positively about him because he was dumped by the previous coach, Checker, and then he was dumped by Eddie Jones on the cusp of the World Cup. So it's one of those ones where I think Dave Rennie would have learned a lot from his experience.
And said he has, yeah.
And he said, and I was actually disappointed from the coach, it was a 25, 30-minute presser there with Dave that no one actually asked him, what is it that you learned? Because you had a 38% win record, Dave. What is it that you actually learned through the 3 years that you had with the Wallabies, the cutthroat nature of getting sacked? Because it would have actually shed a fair bit of light into Scott Robinson, what maybe he's experienced now, what he's going to have learned from his first crack as international coach. And I think that there was a massive missed opportunity to bring into the public about what are some of the differences between domestic coaching and international coaching. Because you hear Eddie Jones talk about it, but everyone goes, oh, well, I can't stand Eddie, so I'm not going to listen to him. And I thought it could have been a great chance to find out more, because domestic comp, you have them for 30 weeks, sometimes 40 weeks if you're up in the north. Well, for international coaching, you go from having them for 3 weeks in July, week off, couple of weeks, week off. It is so different. And the managing of expectations, the competitiveness, the different strength. This is the other thing. They had a raft of different strength of conditioning coaches that came in 2022, and they couldn't get it right. And for whatever reason, it was basically like work experience guys coming in. That's another thing that he would have learned around how important it is to have stability in through that area. So, uh, yeah, like the other thing is that the public barely ever hears the reports. And what have we heard from the report from last year that they conducted? Well, we haven't heard anything. And what I heard was that it was positive, but it was done by Peter Horn's mate from World Rugby. They're just going to make it a cushy report to suit the narrative that they want. But what was the report at the end of the 2022? We don't really know. What was the report at the end of 23? Well, we know that it wasn't great with Eddie, and a bunch of Wallabies didn't like what happened at the World Cup. They spoke to the Hoopers of the world too. Like, clearly he wasn't going to be happy himself. So, yeah, it's fascinating what things will come out, depending on what kind of spin you want.
Yeah, that question from Bevan Collis. Thanks for that one, Bevan. I think there's another one in there around should Wallabies fans and Australia in general be concerned by, the fact that Dave has some intimate knowledge of Australian players, and that he will have, trade secrets almost of what their strengths and weaknesses are. I don't think that's too much of a concern, really, because you can see that by watching any game any day of the week, right? And sure, you might not know them on a personal level like Dave does, but in terms of styles of play and whatever else, you've got data analysts for days, and teams have got that. So, look, there might be one or two, little tidbits he can share, and I don't think he's not the type of person that will make a point of doing that anyway. He's not going to come in with a dossier of, this player's got a dodgy this, and this player can't do that, is susceptible to a bit of a chirp, get in his ear and say this about him or whatever. I don't think that is Dave Rennie's go.
No, I don't think so. And I think a lot's made of that sort of thing. I don't think I think it's irrelevant. I think what people should be concerned about is that it's almost Dave Rennie 2.0 from an international perspective. He will be, I think, a much better coach because of that Wallabies experience. And that's the unfortunate reality for the Wallabies. I loved the fact that he thought that in all likelihood we're taking on the Springboks in a quarterfinal. Like, it was, and it can't be wrong, because the last time the Wallabies did beat New Zealand was 2020, Dave Rennie's first year in charge, which was actually his best year against the ABs. There was the draw in Wellington, there was the win in Brisbane, 4 matches there. So, it'll be a fascinating one from how Dave Rennie, who he picks. He used to have Damian McKenzie as his 10, obviously, after Aaron Cruden at the Chiefs. What role does McKenzie have? I think probably the utility one off the bench, but he's going to have a very busy next few months, because he's got to get his backroom team together. Liam Napier's done a good job already kind of cracking some of the secrets there, but he's going to be leaning on people that he's had at the Chiefs in the past. A Scottish figure as well, who escapes my memory for the moment, but Kobe is going to go deep into the
Mike Blair, I think it is.
Mike Blair, yeah. But Kobe is going to go deep into the Japanese League 1 year, so he's not going to be back in New Zealand until June, and then he's got to have, I imagine, a couple of days off, and then he'll be very, very busy for a long time before the greatest rivalry.
Greatest rivalry indeed. Before we get to that, a fascinating, beginning to the Nations Championship, the inaugural Nations Championship is ahead of us, not just from an All Blacks perspective, but equally England. It might be the dying days of the Steve Borthwick regime. Christy, who knows? And we'll head to the Six Nations now, where, of course, that Italian win in Rome. Incredible. First time in 34, I think, games. I'm not sure what it was for the Wallabies, maybe 21 games they played against Australia previously before they got their first win. But you had the feeling going in for this one in Rome that the Italians were going to be in it. Whether they were going to be good enough to win it, a different story. But trailing late on, they make the most of a couple of yellow cards to England, finish the job. And I tell you what, my love affair for Tommaso Menoncello just gets bigger every time I see him play. If he's not the best 12 getting around in world rugby, he's very, very close.
Yeah, what I love about it is it's a proper Italian name. You don't have Liner and
Or Craig Gower in there.
and Ioane on the two wings, and then Menoncello. He is quality. And he's 105 kilo wrecking ball. He's been signed by Toulouse.
Yeah.
He's going to be going there.
And they don't sign, pork pies.
Oh no, not in the crucial position of number 12. He's quality, and the try that he scored was just brilliant. He set up another one. It was I don't think it was a classic by any stretch of the imagination, but it was engrossing. The yellow cards, the drama. Underhill goes off, and then Maro Toja himself, and geez, like the capitulation at the end, not even to compete for the last line out there, was just fascinating. It kind of smacked of a national union who was muddled in their thinking. To not put someone up in the last minute of the game, like 15 seconds to go, and you don't compete in the air to try to get the ball back was clueless. It was extraordinary. And there are now, 12 straight tests for England that they won. They were pretty impressive against New Zealand back in 24 when New Zealand scraped over the line a couple of occasions. But they smoked the All Blacks. That was really probably the final nail on the coffin there for Scott Robinson last year at Twickenham, and now 3 straight defeats, and people wondering whether or not Steve Borthwick continues.
And rumblings coming out of this camp all over the place that, there's leadership conjecture, and I haven't seen it. I just saw the headline. It might have been Alex Lowe in the Times that there's a blow up between Atoje and Finn Smith late in that game on Saturday night, and just a camp that isn't all that content. And it's just amazing to think, as you say, 12 wins on the bounce, to suddenly be in a position where the board, the RFU chief Bill Sweeney's got to come out and issue a statement to say, well, you've got this weekend and the 3 Nations Championship games, and we're fully supportive and putting the things in place that we need you to get back to playing the rugby that you do. But you're only making that statement because you're in a particular position, and that position for England is not a good one.
No, and they've got France this weekend at the start of France. The France will be seething, reeling off the back of their heavy defeat really against Scotland. They've scored 3 tries in the last 7 minutes or so to put some respectability on it and salvage a bonus point, 4 tries. But it's a huge weekend, massive ramifications all over the place. But it's fascinating with Italy. Like, they've taken some big scalps. Scotland first up, and now they've taken England. Wow, like they are a rising.
Could have beaten Ireland.
Could have beaten Ireland. They, of course, that was the defeat against Dave Rennie's Wallabies that put the wheels in motion for him to get the flick there. But it shows the rise of Italy. And actually, my dad asked a question he texted me yesterday.
Big fan of the pod, your dad too.
He is indeed. But he said, how can you explain Italy's rise? Like, they are, over the last 24 months, the nation that you'd have to say that it's risen quickest, the fastest. What's it about? Well, they've got 2 teams in that URC at the moment. And if you look about, across the world, and clearly Ireland went to 4 provinces, but they base it around Leinster, Munster, but mainly Leinster. Scotland's gone to 2 sides. Who's in charge there now? Like, Gregor Townsend's there, but David Nucifora has been the person there for the last 10 months who's been their director of rugby, who left Rugby Australia, didn't he, after a very quick consulting period. But he's there, and Italy's gone to 2 domestic sides themselves a number of years ago now. But they've had some success at 20s level. They've got much better there, and you're seeing that come through a wave of quality Italians. They could even get better. But that kind of, I think, in a nutshell, you look at those 3 kind of nations, and they're getting things right, and it's now starting to speak volumes on the footy field. And there's still the talk around, can Australia support 4 sides at the moment? Domestic from a Super Rugby perspective, it's just going to be something that you're going to continue to talk about more and more.
Got a very good coach in Gonzalo Quesada too at the moment. You and I were at that game in Lyon when they were trounced, I think, 90 to about 15 by New Zealand. They were playing some great rugby, but they were playing All Blacks rugby against the All Blacks, and there's only ever going to be one winner there, and I tell you, it's not going to be Italy. So, and then they've kind of gone a little bit more. We know they're a team that is very firm defensively. They pull numbers into the breakdown. They're well organised, and they've got not only Menincello, Brex is also a very good centre. You mentioned Ioane and Liner on the wings. Garbisi has had, I think he's into his sixth Six Nations now. He's got that experience behind him.
Got goals.
Really good scrum, front rowers for days. So, look, they are a team on the up. And, you know, if they beat Wales this year, 3 wins in a Six Nations for a team that had lost 34 straight or whatever it was, full stop in the Six Nations would be incredible. I just want to call this one out from Bomber, asking about who the Scottish commentator was in the Italy-England game, and can we get him to call all rugby games? Well, Jamie Lyle is his name, and he's a commentary gun for hire. He's very good. His command of the English language might be the best of any commentator. His way with words is exceptional in a very polished Scottish accent, and I agree. It was a fantastic call of a dramatic finish there in Rome.
Heck of a call. I texted him last night to say congrats, because I watched the bulk of it Sunday morning and then a little bit more Monday morning, just the last 10 minutes. Yeah, he was brilliant with his call. Top bloke as well. I know he does a bit of football stuff.
He does. Multi-skilled.
Yeah, he's quality. But good shout out. I thought he had a great call, and it was appropriate. Like Rome, 70,000 there. I still am calling for it. 2035 is the World Cup for Italy, Spain, maybe Portugal as well. Have the bulk of it in the pool stages across those 3 countries, and then come the semis in both Italy and Spain. I'd love it. I'd love to see it, and then maybe the final. Well, pick
the new Camp Nou.
100,000 there would be good, but unfortunately, it's not going to be in Australia next year, won't it? But I think this is an opportunity for World Rugby to lean into the rise of Italy, because it wasn't long ago there was calls for them to get kicked out of Six Nations and have Georgia come in. Like, they are now starting to show that they belong at the top table.
Well, the Springboks aside, you know, on any day, given day, and, you know, some are more common than others, the rest of that top 10 in the world is capable of knocking each other off. So,
New Zealand only scraped home 2 years ago against them.
And only scraped home at Murrayfield last year, Scotland ranked 8th. So, look, things are changing. Set the stage for a brilliant World Cup last year. And when, you know, we've had a lot of, not to make this a Code Wars thing, and I find that whole situation tedious, but as you say, this should be World Rugby, you know, crying from the hills. And I think they've done that with the creation of the Nations Championship. There's questions around the travel and is this going to work? But I think the interest level in it, Christy, could be phenomenal.
Totally. I think it'll be fantastic. And it's going to be, you know, this year it's going to add another new dimension to it. And, you know, we're going to see, it's a shame Fiji can't play at home much, because that's going to make it a severe disadvantage for them.
But let's hope they fill their coffers on the other hand, though.
Indeed, and that's the big thing. It needs some money, particularly the Pacific regions.
Just quickly before we finish up, the other big game, well, 3 big games this weekend, really, but England, France, you know, they could really pile some paint on for England, but can Scotland snap their duck against Ireland and win away in Dublin? And I guess by extension, who is your Six Nations champions?
Well, I watched the games on the weekend. They were enthralling, like that Scottish game where they were just elite. But no Kyle Steyn. He looks like he'll be out injured for a while, a couple of tries. He's a brilliant player. Darcy Graham, those sorts of guys have shown that you don't have to be the big, massive athletes to score tries. You know, they're built like the Jorgensens, proper footy players. Can they win in Dublin? They absolutely can. And if they do, then it means that the late game, the last game, the French game will determine who gets it. I can't imagine Scotland getting a bonus point in Dublin. I think that would be perhaps too beyond them. But you can't write them off. And what they're doing is immense. Sione Tuipulotu, Jack Dempsey playing there, guys who grew up playing in Australia. Just, it continues to frustrate me that they're doing such wonders up there in the north, which leads me to my last point.
Let's have it.
Tom Staniforth, he's not going to play for France this week. If he does, well, he'll be making his debut. But I can't imagine for a game where they're trying to fight back, that they need a bounce back, that they're capping someone like a Tom Staniforth. If that happens, it means that the former Brumby, the former Tar, the Canberra-born bloke with the
Australian
massive
as the
mullet,
day is long.
yeah, he still will be eligible for the Wallabies. Phil Waugh, pick up the phone, because I'll tell you what, he will be capped in July against the Wallabies in that 3 matches when they come down here. He'll be capped because he's playing for Cast. They're not going to make the top 14 finals, certainly not the last 2 weeks of that, which means they won't be picking the Toulouse players.
The way France treat that squad, yeah.
Yeah. So that's where he'll probably make his debut. But there's the opportunity before then for Phil Waugh, for Rugby Australia to go, we know you're not coming back, but that's fine because we can't afford to pay you. You're earning a lot of money at Cast. You've bulked up. You're 125 kilo. You're exactly who we want. A 31-year-old lock who's battled hardened. Let's pick him for the Wallabies. He hasn't got a test cap. Who cares? He spent 6 years playing Super Rugby, and he was basically told, like, you don't really have a future here. You know, you might be able to have a contract for 80,000. Well, he's now like earning 600,000 up there. Of course, he's not going to come back, but here's an opportunity for the hardest worker in French rugby. Legitimately, the stats prove that for the last 5 years around post-contact meters, carries, tackles. He leads all the numbers there. He's put on 10 kilos since he went up. He was a bit of a plotter before, but he's now a proper player who's so disciplined. He's exactly what the Wallabies kind of need. And if he gets a cap for France, I reckon he maybe finishes his career with a handful of caps. He could play 20, 30 tests for the Wallabies over the next 3 years, carve out a great career, continue the proud stunner fourth name from an Australian perspective. I know Anthony Abrahams, the former Wallaby in the late 60s, has been writing extensively, previously with the Raw, but he writes often to Dan Herbert, to Brett Robertson around the moral obligation. He hates the idea of Australians playing for
under residency grounds, yeah.
On residency grounds up there in France, Scotland, wherever you want it. He doesn't believe it, particularly if you don't have a grandma that's up there like a Sione Tuipulotu does. It's an opportunity to get one back, and he's not going to cost anything. It's a no-brainer. Pick up the phone, Phil.
Feels like a good way to finish. Christy, that's a big pod. We've had code swaps, we've had commentary highlights, we've had TMO, grassy knoll footage, a new All Blacks coach, mate. The list goes on.
Last
feels like
one, Sevens, women fell just short in Vancouver, but another great final against New Zealand. The men showing really good signs under Liam Barry. They're making a semi-final, just fell short there. And the Wallaroos squad just been announced. They've got a couple of test matches coming up soon, a tour of the US not too far around the corner. So, yeah, lots going on.
They do. And Caitlin Hulse, I think Nath Williamson, Nate the Great, informed me that left out of that squad because she's had a few injuries post World Cup across the off season. So they're just treating her return to play very carefully, of course, at a young age. So no panic there. She's not jumping codes.
No, well, she re-signed last year.
She did. But as we know with women's sport, things can change rapidly, and the NRLW are certainly very aggressive. Mate, great to see you. As I said, bumper pod, so much to talk about. Continues a massive start to the year. I think our numbers are up about 80%, mate, for pods this year, and that's not even including YouTube. So thanks very much for listening. If you're finding us for the first time this year, great to have you on board. And we'll be back again next week for more ESPN Scrum Reset. Until then, enjoy the footy. Cheers.